If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, FitNest Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at FitNestMama, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the FitNest Mama podcast. Today, I chat all things toddler sleep with Georgina Windebank, who is a holistic sleep consultant and qualified naturopath. So Georgina uses her unique skills with these two different modalities to holistically help solve sleep challenges for babies and toddlers. Georgina is a mother to a 5-year-old and hosted the Holistic Baby and Toddler Sleep podcast. And in this episode, as I mentioned, we do discuss all things toddler sleep and how to get your little one to get the rest they need. We know that sleep is crucial for toddlers' growth, their development, and overall health and mood. And in this episode, we'll explore why sleep matters. And Georgina shares some practical tips for creating a sleep-friendly environment, managing nap time resistance, and more. So we discuss why sleep is so important for toddlers. We discuss creating a sleep-friendly environment for your toddler. We discuss the role of sleep in parent-child bonding and attachment and the relationship between this connection and healthy sleep habits. So that is really interesting, especially when at the time your baby might become a toddler. They might also be going to childcare. As a parent, you might be going back to work. So there's some really interesting relationships here. And we also discuss the common sleep challenges for toddlers, including resistance to nap times and bedtime battles. And finally, we discuss the relationship between food and sleep, the role of fussy eating and creating healthy mealtime routines that helps to support good sleep habits. So we discuss a lot, and I trust if you've got a toddler or even an older child, like I gained value from this podcast episode, and my children are quite a bit older now, or perhaps you've got a soon-to-be toddler, then this episode is absolutely perfect for you. Go ahead and share it with any friends who you might know have toddler bedtime battles. And I trust you'll get heaps of value from listening today. But before we do dive in, I do invite you to come and check out FitNest Mama. If you have found you're not exercising as much as you'd like to during pregnancy or after birth or throughout toddlerhood, perhaps you're busy, you've lost motivation, or you're not sure how to best be looking after your body. Perhaps you'd like to get back into running after birth and you want the best kickstarter possible. Then FitNest Mama is for you. Join us for these convenient, short, easy workouts that you can do from your home whilst your toddler runs around or at the end of a long day at work. Just head to fitnessmama.com and there is a free 7-day trial. So you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Right, let's dive into this podcast episode all about toddler sleep. Georgina, thank you so much for joining me on the FitNest Mama podcast. I'm really excited to chat all things toddler sleep today. And as we were just saying off air, I am excited to chat about toddler sleep because I feel like baby sleep gets a lot of airtime. We're very much focused on baby sleep. And I think it's almost as if when our babies grow, we figure that parents have got it sorted and we focus more on the baby's sleep. Whereas we all know, like I've had 3 children, toddler sleep can be a huge issue. So I'm really excited to keep this conversation to toddlers. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just love talking about anything sleep related, but particularly toddlers, because I do think that often things will have not been good from the beginning, or often things may have been good and then it falls off in toddlerhood. So it's very complex, and I'm really happy to be talking about it today.
So my first question was going to be, what are the common issues? But let's take a step back. Why is sleep so important for toddlers? It might seem like an obvious question, but why do you feel it's so important?
Well, obviously development. So development is incredibly important through all the years, and this is when they often head off to childcare and soon to be ready for kindergarten, and they're learning and they're consolidating that information during sleep. So it's really important for development to have great sleep and certain amount of sleep. But the other thing that I find that's often missed is around the connection between nutrition. So I'm a qualified naturopath, as we mentioned off air before. So this is something I really focus on. And this is something that parents maybe are not sure about the relationship, because if you have a tired child or a child that's not getting enough rest, they're often not eating well. So I have comments from clients saying, they're fussy, they're not eating enough, they won't eat their dinner, they're waking up hungry, all that sort of stuff. So the connection between nutrition and sleep is paramount. And interestingly, like you were talking about with babies, that connection is really focused on when they're newborn. We feed, we sleep, we nappy change. We feed, we sleep, we nappy change. But it seems to get lost as they get older and as they go into toddlerhood. So that connection is really important. And then there's obviously the connection with mood and energy. So obviously if they're not sleeping well, they're not going to have the energy to learn, to play, to grow. And then you may have a very cranky toddler and very grizzly, whingy, all of those things. So having a well-rested toddler is paramount.
I'm just nodding here. Like, I've got 3 children and you were talking to just one of my child. I won't say which child it is, but they're quite a bit older now, so they're not a toddler.
Okay.
But I'm just like nodding because I can see exactly that relationship between, like, they're picky eaters. You know that they're hungry, they're wanting to snack. And this is as a child, not as a, school-age child. They're wanting to snack, and then they're waking up hungry and their mood. And so I totally get where you.
I was working with a family the other day, and they had I think it was actually, might have been 2.5, 3, so maybe a little bit older, but was not eating dinner and ravenous in the morning. Not eating dinner because dinner's too close to bedtime, ravenous in the morning. This is that's a really obvious picture that says to me there's disconnect. And then even a lot of toddlers will wake up prematurely because they haven't had enough food to sustain a nap. Their really long nap that they should be having. So there's all sorts of ways that can present. And yes, it's a really common problem that people have.
So when you're chatting to a family about their toddler, what would be the first thing you target? If you can notice that relationship between food, sleep, mood, what's the number one thing you're going to target first? Is it actually the food side of things?
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months. Yes, that's 9 months. They also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
No. Well, the first thing I would target was actually the environment. So I have a 5 stages to successful sleep, which encompasses my naturopathic health science background and the sleep side of things. So, and it is kind of a process of elimination when you're talking about problems with toddler sleep or baby sleep. So we work out the first thing is where they're sleeping, what they're wearing, all of that stuff, but that's just part of the problem. Then we go on to scheduling, which is the answer to your question. So looking at when are the naps, how long are the naps, and where's the food placement. So I would say nearly 100% of the clients and the girls within my membership, they haven't got, because if you don't have routine with sleep, then you don't have routine with food. So it's encompassing both of those. So we put them on an appropriate, age-appropriate routine for them. And it's not just, every 16-month-old does this. It's about your 16-month-old. What do they need as an individual? And then placing the food appropriately, and also the content of food. So that's another thing that we really get into traps with parents is about, especially if you've got a fussy eater, which I can absolutely relate to fussy eating. That's epic for me. And that was really hard as a naturopath too, to have a fussy eater. But the content of the food, because if you're only feeding carbohydrates, fruit, and sort of what we call empty calories as a naturopath, then you're not filling them up. So they're hungry again in half an hour. So the content of the food, the placement of the food, and then I move on to other things, which I'm sure we'll get to, but other things like, do they have a particular sleep association or sleep crutch that they need to get to sleep? And that's when I think if it hasn't been solved as their babies, it's sometimes really ingrained as toddlers. So, yeah, I look at the sleep and the food together.
Yeah, interesting. And the fact that you put that sleep association at the bottom of the list is really interesting, because I always felt that was almost the number one thing.
Well, you wouldn't, because they're quite ingrained. So let's say the toddler still has bottles. So I have a lot of toddlers that have a dependence on milk bottles. It could be cow's milk, it could be formula, it could be breast milk, I guess, as well. And if you were to address that first, you'd be on an absolute uphill battle, because if you can deal with at least those first two stages, and I've got other stages, it's usually a 5-stage thing. So I also talk about connection with parent and connection with sleep space. If you're not dealing with the comfortability, what they're wearing, how warm it is, their schedule, they're not getting enough sleep, then you sort of see where everything lands. Then you see, okay, so where are we now? Okay, we've only got the sleep association left. If it is a problem, which usually by toddlerhood it would be a problem, then where do we go from there? And then that's when we come up with a strategy for that. So it's kind of like dealing, it's like a process of elimination, I like to think, dealing with the things that are kind of, quote, easier first, and then dealing with that big problem possibly later. Yeah.
I totally get it. Okay, well, let's start at the top of that list then. And could you talk us through, like, if you're a parent with a toddler and you're, nodding your head and this is all sounding like it's hitting the spot, could we go through creating a sleep-friendly environment for your toddler and, like, talk about that? Like, that's what you mentioned, isn't it? Like that sleep space and environment is at the top of the list. What are some key things that you'd want to consider here?
Well, when we're talking about toddlers, fears and nightmares and night terrors can start to come into action. So I often suggest getting down on the ground or getting down into their cot level or bed level and looking up with the lights off and see what they see. Are you seeing shadows? Yeah. And if you combine that with other factors like overtiredness, overstimulation, overheating, then you might be looking at a picture that presents as a night terror or nightmare. So looking at from that perspective, then I find that 100% of the children that I work with are not dressed appropriately. And that's often because we're taught that our children don't overheat the baby, don't overheat the children. But in fact, it's often the opposite. And no matter what climate you live in, there will still be a time where the temperature drops. It's usually between 3 and 5 a.m. Even in summer, that can still happen. So making sure they're warm and cozy. And I mean, part of that is that they're dressed appropriately. They obviously can't have blankets as toddlers and doonas because it's not okay to have that in the cot, and it's not safe to have them because they're obviously rolling, definitely by that point. So safety is really paramount in any case I'm looking into. Then darkness is really overlooked. So if you're coming out of a sleep cycle, if you're coming into the early hours of the morning and you're going into a lighter stage of sleep and there's light coming through somewhere, then that is often the indicator that wakes them up. And then trying to get a toddler back to sleep is a lot harder than trying to get a baby back often. So environment, and then there might be sleep association. So if they have a dummy, do they have the dummy? Can they replace the dummy? Now, this is a really interesting one because younger babies cannot, 4 to 6 months. That's a really good time to get rid of it because they can't replace it if it becomes problematic. From 8 months old, we can start to teach them to replace it, and I do a lot of that. At toddlerhood, if they haven't been taught, that can still be a massive problem. And I've had parents where they're doing dummy runs a lot of the night. So you either need to decide whether you teach them at that later stage or you get rid of it. But they also might have a comforter, which is an incredible sleep association, a positive sleep association. I gave them to my little guy when he was a lot younger, and he's 5.5 and still sleeps with them. Obviously only one when they're babies, but when they're 5.5, they can have their 3. So, yeah, those kind of things in the environment are paramount.
So much to consider, isn't it?
And I mean, look, it's really logical. This is kind of what I love the work too. It's really logical and it's really practical. But when you're sleep deprived, you can't see the forest through the trees. You can't see, because I often have parents that are jumping, oh, my child's doing this, and they're jumping, they're trying this routine, and they're trying more awake time, and they're trying this fancy light, and they're trying this fancy blind, and they've asked their friend and they've asked their mum. It's so confusing out there. It is so confusing. So that's why process elimination is a really kind of practical way to address these.
So good. Now, one thing did pop up for me. So when you're talking about toddler, are you talking about the ages 1 to 3, roughly?
Yeah, well, we say preschools are 3. So, yeah, 1 to 3.
Yeah. So I remember when I had my when I was pregnant, I never wanted to have 2 cots in the house. So I always tried to get my older child into a bed before my next child was born. So that was always at about 2 years old. Do you have any quick, I know we could probably do a whole episode just on.
We could do a whole episode on each question you're asking me. I'm having to contain my answer because I've got so much to say.
I know.
About all
and Georgina, I'm having a bit of a chuckle because I think a few days ago you're like, oh, I don't think we'll have enough to talk about. And I was like, yeah, I think we will.
I said I could talk about this endlessly, that's for sure.
So you might have a podcast episode on this too, transitioning to a cot, or maybe that could be a next transitioning to a
that one,
bed.
Yeah, I think I've got some others on what other things we're going to talk about in terms of childcare, but yes, not that one. But the main tip around cot thing is, and I totally understand that. I understand the cost of having 2 cots. I understand all of that. However, I do find obviously when I'm seeing families, they're running into trouble because they have allowed that second child to go into a cot, they've allowed the elder child to get out of the cot too soon, then they all of a sudden get a little visitor in the night. And the reason for that is that there's a real level of maturity and impulse control that comes into play. And in my opinion, they really don't have that till about 3, maybe 2.5, 3. But I really try and keep my clients in their cots until 3, because then they have that impulse control. You may have a strategy in place if that does happen, but putting them out of the cot any earlier, I find runs into trouble, because then, and that's where the environment is so important. If you've got a child that can get out of their bed, and let's say they're 2, plus they're cold, so they're waking because they're cold, then they're looking for warmth, plus they don't have the impulse control to stay in the bed, you're going to have a little visitor. And I do have an episode on that about how it's important to look at all these factors and how all these factors are intertwined. So that's the problem with that. So I always say, if you can borrow a cot, look at another solution and try and keep them in there until they're 3, unless they are crawling out and it's a safety issue. Obviously, that is another killer fish.
Yeah. Actually, that's totally just...
Did you have a little visitor in the night? Did you find that your elder one came and visited you?
No, she was pretty good. But I remember that's why I had to get her out of the cot. She tried to jump out a few times and she landed in a not safe position once.
And it's
she
really
landed on her head.
My children are so different, because my son, he never even came into his head, because he's never been an overly adventurous type physically. He was never a climber or anything like that. And then when we put him in the big bed at 3, he never got out of the big bed to come and find us because 1, his sleep pressure was right. So his level of tiredness was 100% right.
Yeah.
A lot of times children will come looking for their parent. They're not tired enough, or they're too tired perhaps,
Yeah.
but often not tired enough. So then they're coming looking for the parent. He didn't even realize that he could actually kind of get out of the bed until 4. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's another one of the things. I don't know if you want to talk about nap time and bedtime resistance. That's another really big thing for toddlers as well.
Okay, let's go for it.
So I guess with this all comes down to that sort of stage 2 that I do. So nap time resistance can often become an issue because parents might be on the same schedule for a really long time. Let's say you have a child who's gone to one nap because all the signs have been there, and you started that process at 11:30. Here you are 4 months later and you're still putting your child down at 11:30. That can create issues because for a few reasons. So one, if you're going down at the same time months and months later, plus you're giving them the same amount of nap time if they'll do it, then it takes away from the nighttime sleep. So often parents we talk about a 24-hour cycle. It's really how much sleep is happening in a 24-hour cycle. But as it's understandable, as a child gets older, they can handle more awake time. So the time for the one nap should be moving and progressing. So I really don't start that until 12 p.m., and then it might move through. You might see nap resistance, so then you need to move it to 12:15. Then you see more nap resistance, you move it to 12:30. But so you're looking at pushing it later as they get older, but you're also looking at the duration of the nap. And I come across a lot of parents who are like, oh, they're still napping for 2 hours. But like even a 2-year-old might do that if you're lucky, or an 18-month-old is doing that, but then they're having early rising or night waking. So if you're having problems at another part of that 24-hour cycle, there is something wrong with the nap. So that nap resistance is usually about the time of the nap and the duration. And then bedtime resistance is a really interesting one because that can also be around sleep pressure. So if you let them have this big whopping nap in the middle of the day and then you're still trying to put them to sleep at 6:30 or 7, they're not tired.
Yeah.
So you will get bedtime resistance. Plus, obviously, toddlers, they love to push those boundaries. So with my clients, I really try and encourage boundaries as babies because then you're not dealing with it as toddlers. So, for example, books, they might read one book to their baby, but when it gets to toddlers, they will ask and ask.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes. So I'm really strict on that because if you don't cut that now.
Yeah.
So I've had parents that are there for like an hour reading books and singing and all this sort of stuff, which is all great as part of a wind down routine. But when it goes too far, there's a few things that are happening. One, you may get bedtime resistance because then like, hang on, we've been doing this for an hour and now you're leaving me. What? Or 2, they were winding down. Oh, and now we're on to the 5th song, and they back up again and they've had sort of a resurgence of energy. So they're very functional and they're specific. I'm very specific with my bedtime routines with toddlers and all that sort of stuff because they have a function, but you don't want to broaden that function and allow them to have too much leeway.
Oh my gosh, yes. And then you put in other babies into the mix, and suddenly the whole bedtime routine, it's like a marathon effort.
Absolutely, yes. I hear this from a lot. I've worked with parents with 2, 3, 4, 5 children, and yes, and there's a lot of talk in my membership about that, about how to balance multiple children.
Because I do know, what should we talk about? Because there's 2 things I'd love to just talk about before we wrap up this episode, and that was your connection with the parent, because I suspect that that's got a big thing to do with toddler sleep, but also the food aspect. I'd love you to touch on that too. So let's go into that connection with the parent that you're talking about.
Well, I think that's very relevant anyway with toddlers, but it's often relevant when it comes to the childcare transition. So that is often an age mum might go back to work, or the parent, whoever's been at home, might go back to work after a year. I mean, often 8 months, very varying times. That will coincide with the child going off to childcare. So they're so used to the main parent that cares for them being at home, or both possibly, and then off they go to childcare. And that loss of connection and that separation anxiety can be really, really affect certain children. It can be such a hard transition. Now, I do have to say, if you don't have your sleep, and I have an episode on this because it is a huge topic. If you don't have the sleep good, in a great spot and mostly independent, it will be a disaster, to put it lightly, when they head off to childcare, because it's very unlikely that another carer can pat your child to sleep, rock your child to sleep. It's obviously breastfeeding, if that's a particular thing that is becoming a problem for you as an individual or as for your child, then obviously you're not going to be doing that at childcare. So that's the first thing around that, is making sure they can sleep on their own before they go to childcare. That will make the transition easier, and it may even make that separation from parent much, much smoother and less upsetting for everybody. So what I say around that, and what I say around toddlers and sleep, is enhancing that one-on-one time when you are together. So intentional one-on-one time. So my little guy, he went off to nanny share, which is at a house with a qualified nanny and 3 or 4 other children. We had a huge drive. So we had an hour at each end of the day. And I obviously could, because I had my own business, but I was really firm about picking him up at 4 because he was 16 months old or something. And so we connected on the hour drive there, and then he had his great nap, and I would take all my sleep props to the house because he would go to sleep like that, because obviously I'd helped him, but also I was able to have all my bits and pieces. And then we would reconnect on the way home. We'd talk about his day. Sometimes I'd give him a book and we'd talk about that. And then I picked him up at 4 o'clock. So by the time we got home, it was 5. I had 2 solid hours of reconnection with him. And I think that's the tricky part with having multiple children, is or cooking dinner or racing home from childcare. Somewhere in that, you may not have 2 hours, but somewhere in that, you've got to set a time. It might be 10 minutes. 10 minutes of one-on-one intentional time with a child is more powerful than 3 hours of everyone being busy and rushing and you're not actually connecting with them. So listening to their fears, talking about their day, even as babies when they can't necessarily communicate, I would still talk to him, and no matter what age they are, it's really, really important. And you want to be doing that one-on-one time often away from the bedroom, because then otherwise you might be having these huge conversations at bedtime and they're wanting to unload at that time. But they also need to be connected to their sleep space so they feel 100% comfortable as well. So I think, and you've obviously got days that you may not work, or the weekend. So really trying to maybe have your partner take another child and you've got this child, and maybe you swap. But it's really about intentional one-on-one time, no matter how small it is, but particularly on those days away from you.
And I can even see that now. Like, I've got a 10, 8 and 5-year-old. With my 10 and 8-year-old, if we haven't had a chance to have a proper conversation or one-on-one time, then it's invariably going to happen when I'm just about to say goodnight to them. Perhaps I've read to them or they've read to me, and then they start saying, at school today, and I think, here we go, this is going to be 20 minutes of chatting, which is fine. Like, it's what they need, but it's probably not the best place to start.
The drive home, I guess it's hard with multiple children in the car, but the drive home is often I would say to him after kindergarten, how was your day? What did you do today? Nothing. You get that, and as they get older, I'm sure you've got that, they have nothing. But at sort of the toddler age, they're very willing to have monologues about what they have done in the day. So that drive, and they can't go anywhere, so we've got them in the seat. So it's actually a really great time to do that. You might even cook a meal together. Might they do some chopping wherever they're at developmentally, or they might just sit or stand on one of those ladders as you chop. So as long as you're doing something together and having some time, it's really, really powerful.
And I've heard that for teenagers too. If you can get them off their phone, that car trip, your captive audience, and that's when you get to probably the only time you get to have a conversation with them.
The grunting, apparently teenage boys are just going to grunt. I'm not looking forward to that.
Oh, dear. Too
and
funny.
The other thing on that is that childcare is, because it's such a big block of time, then you're also asking them to be asleep for another big block of time away. So that's also why those 2 big blocks, there's got to be something in the middle for reconnection.
Yeah. Okay. All of that, I think it all makes perfect sense. It's great. So let's finish off with some discussing food. And I know this is a big topic, and I know this is everything you offer. So at the end, I'll ask you to let our audience know, where they can find you for more information and your brilliant podcast. But let's discuss food to finish off, because it's huge. And I can see this whole picky, fussy eating, snacking, not eating quality food. I can see all this playing out. So what do you do if your toddler is fussy? How do you get good quality food into them?
Goodness me, this is a big topic. So
in 5 minutes.
A sensitive topic for me. No, I've really come a long way with it. So first of all, I do think it's important, and I've spoken to an incredible pediatric naturopath about this as well, who specialises in that. My take, so one of the things that I used to do, because my child ate everything until he was 1, and then from 1 to 2, he had no main form of protein and only 2 vegetables, corn and beetroot. So no fish, no red meat, no chicken. Nightmare. So I had to load up in other ways to get protein in, and in that case was eggs and nuts. But I made sure I displayed this stuff. So I still, just because he wasn't eating it at that time, I still presented it to him. And she agreed with me. We don't just take away the food. Oh, Reggie doesn't like tomatoes, because that's what I would do. Oh, Reggie doesn't like tomatoes, so I never gave them to him. It's important to still show them the food and offer it to them, because guess what? One day at 5 years old, he tried tomatoes. So keep offering, keep showing up, as well as I do think it's important to hide some things, because you just need to get the nutrition in. So sometimes we would make bliss balls and I would hide vegetables in there. So I used to use my Thermomix, and I would ground up some spinach, raw spinach, and put that within a bliss ball recipe. And that was, green, I can't remember what we called them, but often green is associated with dinosaur things, and also raw beetroot in another one. I also did it with pancakes. So I'd use a pancake batter mix, and I'd put LSA, the ground up nuts, within that. And then I would put either steamed pumpkin, I'd blitz that and puree that and put that in, so they were like orange by colour, or green for the spinach, or red. So it's important to hide some foods, but also continue to show the foods. And it's also great if you can, and this is something that I've really learnt from this, is I've accommodated to his fussiness a lot of the time. And there are reasons why children can be fussy. Often it can be a medical condition. There is a reason why they're not eating certain things. And for some children, it's constipation. There could be some sort of pain or discomfort. So you really need to work out. And for my son, it wasn't any of those things. It was just fussiness. But is it a medical reason as well, or is it fussiness, just general fussy eating behaviour? And I bowed down to that a bit, because it was a lifestyle thing for us. My husband has his own business. He works really late. So I would be giving him simple food to make sure he ate. So it's important that we keep offering things. You also want to not bow down to the snacking all the time. They need to be presented with 3 main meals a day. Yes, I think snacks are important too, but 3 main meals a day with protein in them. Because as we talked about at the beginning about development, how important nutrition is for development. So protein content is important for development. And that's one of the things that is often lacking in a toddler's diet. So whether it's eggs, LSA in there somewhere, instead of doing Wheat Bix and cornflakes, do porridge. I've got a great reel on this. Do porridge with LSA sprinkles, I call them, and berries and coconut or whatever. So make it exciting, and they can add whatever they want to make it more exciting. But there's not much nutritional content in Wheat Bix, cornflakes, those kind of breakfast cereals. And lunch, I used to find lunch really hard, because that was the one meal he didn't really want to sit down for. Toddlers are on the go. Toddlers are moving. But you can still do a platter or a plate that has different food options, including a protein source, be it cheese, hummus with veggie sticks, anything like that, and then dinner, and obviously the placement of these meals. So making sure that they're not too close to the main nap and they're not too close to bedtime, because you'll find they eat less, and you may report, or you may start to see fussy. You're thinking that they're fussy, but they're actually just exhausted. They're too tired to eat. So, yeah, that's kind of something around content, how to display it but also hide it sometimes, and continued exposure. Don't wipe them off. Sometimes I'll hear comments like, oh, my child doesn't eat eggs. There are so many different ways to have eggs. But keep doing it. So even though you might do scrambled, or you might do fried, or you might do dippy eggs, and they reject one of those, go around again and present it again, always making it available and different ways and things like that.
Yeah, love it. And what you're saying, yes, absolutely, it's for toddlers, but I'm nodding my head here. I've now, as I said, got older children. So this, I think, is throughout childhood, this information.
And it absolutely is. And even in his lunchbox, I'll still put things that I made that he may not eat, because they're often eating around other children. And that's something that we also, because when he went to nanny share, I made his lunch. So I hear at childcare they have incredible meals and, kids' curries and stuff like that. That's awesome. And they will be eating around other people. We don't have family. We don't have cousins. We have, one child. So he doesn't have the exposure of watching other children eat. And that is really, really powerful as well in terms of exposing to different foods.
I wish our schools, and I wish they had the whole canteen like in America. Is it America? Yeah, where the kids get a cooked meal, like a proper meal.
Well, my son's just started school in the last month in prep or kindergarten, depending on what state people are in. And he's having bolognese today. It's the first time he's ever had tuck shop or canteen, and he's having spaghetti bolognese. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wasn't like that when I was a kid.
That's right. Thank you so much, Georgina. That is the perfect place to finish up. Can you let everyone know what your podcast is called and how to find you?
Yes, thank you so much. So the podcast is the Holistic Baby and Toddler Sleep Podcast. I like to talk about, sleep, but also nutrition, because those things, as we've talked about, go hand in hand, and that lets me mix my naturopathy background with sleep consulting. And I also have fabulous interviews from professionals on there, which are related to pregnancy and mothering and all that stuff. You can work with me one-on-one by heading to my website, theholisticsleepproject.com. And I also have a membership, which you can also check out at the same place, membership, one-on-one consults. And of course, check me out over on Instagram, The Holistic Sleep Project.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat all things toddler sleep. I think every time I listen to one of these sorts of episodes, it doesn't matter how old my children are, I still get something out of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honour.
Brilliant. We'll catch you soon. And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting the show notes together for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Georgina at fitnessmama.com/podcast. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, to head to Apple Podcasts, or perhaps you're listening on Spotify, and give us a rating and review. It really does help for this podcast to be discovered by more women who it might really help benefit. So thank you, ladies. Appreciate you listening. Have a fabulous day, and I will see you next week for another episode of the FitNest Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the FitNest Mama podcast, brought to you by the FitNest Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at FitNest Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.